YouTube Wednesday! Today I'm going to work on sheet molds. I have a few things that I need to make that are small, flat things that I have to sculpt and then mold. In order to make sure that what I am sculpting will fit in what I am molding it in, I went to Dollar Tree, and at Dollar Tree I purchased just a couple. This is a biscuit and brownie pan. That's what this says. I got a couple of those. And a couple of square cake pans. I got 3 of those. And I'm going to go ahead and sculpt for the biscuit and brownie pan. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the sculpt. I'm using water-based clay. You can get that at any ceramic supply store. And right now I'm just sculpting on a little piece of foam board. If I sculpted directly on this table, then this table is dedicated to that sculpture. If I sculpt on a little piece of wood or something, then I can pick the sculpture up and move it and get it out of harm's way, while I'm still able to use this table for other things. Whenever I'm sculpting with water-based clay, I like to keep a little bit of water on hand and some brushes just to help keep it workable, because it can dry out. Spray bottle's not a bad idea. And whenever you're sculpting, it's a good idea to have a visual reference. I really don't right now. I'm not the best at that. I just kind of go and do stuff. But I'm going to sculpt an ear. And ears are pretty precise because we look at ears all the time. People really know what ears look like. So a bad ear will stand out pretty fast. And this is a pretty fast clay to work with too. The way it blends into the head is a certain way. And I'm just doing a little patch of skin around the ear along with the ear. And I'm not going to sculpt as many undercuts. An undercut, easiest way to explain an undercut is imagine the surface of water, and if you stuck your fist into the surface of water, and here was the water line, if it turned into concrete, which is what plaster does, from liquid to a concrete, you could not pull your fist out because this is wider than your wrist. So to avoid an undercut, everything has to be widest basically at this point. You can mold half a ball, but you can't go further around than a ball. I'm just going to take a brush with some water on it and smooth out this clay a little bit. That brush felt a little too fancy, so I'm going to get a nasty chip brush. And I'm not going for super precision on this ear. I want people to look at it and know it's an ear, be disgusted, and look away. That's really my game plan. I don't want them to note the intricacies of the ear, because this is for a haunted house. If I were sculpting an anatomy model, I would probably spend more time on it. And the nature of the plate mold that I'm doing, it's quick, it's simple. That's what I want. I want easy. This is just another brush, and when I brushed out the clay to move it where I wanted, I put these scratches in it, which I don't want because they look like brush strokes. And I'm just using this other brush to take those scratch marks away. And here I have another brush. This one was cut because I wanted stiffer bristles. I cut this brush down for stiff bristles, which is just one of these cut in half. This is softer because it's longer, and I'm using it to get a good kind of a skin texture, but basically just a pocky texture. And then I'll smooth it down from there. And because I don't want this to look like a blob of skin with an ear on it, I'm going to just make some damage along this outer edge so it's kind of ripped and cut off. One of the great things about using this kind of clay is it's an organic material, so it's very easy to get organic shapes and textures in it. The more you start sculpting, the more you realize kind of everything is a sculpting tool. And if you want a striated muscle texture, a great way to get it is with a comb. That muscle, those striations just underneath of the skin, in the right context, that's it. And then you can brush that out to calm it down. You know, and that's, you know, as long as you run with the length of the muscle, that'll look pretty good. Here I'm just kind of using it to mess it up. I just have a little piece of wire now. I'm going to run along my piece of foam and cut that free. Now that I've cut it free, I can carefully pick it up and put it in the pan I'm going to mold it in. And everywhere I left a little fingerprint, I'm just going to fix that with this. Okay, that's one ear ready to mold. One of the best sculpting tools that I own is a Google image search. Not because I am stealing ideas, but because everything is a combined, you know, I'm combining parts of creatures and inspired by other parts of sculptures. But right now, I can just look at this picture of an ear real quick, and that will really help this come along. Back to Google Image, put in nose instead of ear, and that's a great shot of a nose. And I'm using both hands at once. My thumbs are kind of making the nostrils, and I'm shaping with my outside fingers. It's important when you're sculpting to sculpt what you see, not always what you think you see. They are not always the same thing. And again, I'm doing a pretty quick and dirty sculpt here. So I'm not really worried too much about detail, or, well, about detail, yes. But really I want this quick anatomy. I want them to look at it, know what it is, and be mortified that someone sewed part of another person's nose onto their face. I made a line with my sculpting tool. It's a little harsh, so I'm going with a brush and water, and I'm smoothing out those lines, making them less harsh. There's a depression right under the nose, about the size of a pinky finger, so I used my pinky finger. Once again, I'm just putting a quick brush texture on it, which is fine for skin. Simulates those pores. That's a nose. Not the grandest of noses, but it's a nose. It's my meaty human nose. Okay, what I'm doing now is I'm just looking in here and I am imagining all of this negative space is now stone. Because I'm going to pour plaster into here up to this line. Using this type of a box mold, these are a great pre-made box for small pieces. Using this kind of a box mold, I can make small things, but they can't be any higher up than the top of this. I can check that by taking anything flat and running it across the top. I have roughly a ½ inch of clearance from the tip of my nose, which is the highest thing. Next step, I'm going to mix up plaster, pour it in here up to this line after I grease the pan. Just like I'm making biscuits or something. Alright, I have mixed up a batch of fairly thin plaster. Alright, and I'm just painting the sides and basically in between these. I don't want to use my pan brush to paint my plaster on. So I'm going to grab a new one. And I don't need to paint it in everywhere. I just want to keep the bubbles off of my sculptures. And I want to paint up in the nose cavity to make sure I don't get any air bubbles in there. I have tapped this off really good so that there's not a lot of air bubbles in it, but there's always going to be some that try and get you. Go into my ears here. And just the places where I think air bubbles will form, I really want to paint. Like up under the rim of the ear, there's a little bit of an undercut there. All right. I have those spots covered. I'm not worried about the rest of this causing undercuts. You want to pour a thin, steady stream, all right, because in this thin stream is where all the bubbles will break. And pour it into one spot. As it runs into other areas, it won't form bubbles. If I just loosh this over, then an air bubble could form up underneath. I'm also pouring it onto a spot where I know it won't affect the sculpture. This will also tell you if your table is level. And I look pretty good. Now that I have that set, I can tap this with my finger or with my hand, and you can see bubbles coming up. The air is lighter than the plaster, but the plaster is heavy. So I'm moving the heavy plaster to make room for the air bubble to move up to the top. That's why knocking works. Big bubbles, you just pop with your finger. Just spreading it out. A little higher on that side than I am on this side. Once again, knocking to get bubbles out. Poking the big ones with my finger.